Good evening. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
It works. Welcome to our forum. In behalf of the League of Women Voters, I thank you for coming. I'm Judy Miller from Cornville, and I'll be your moderator this evening. I'd like to introduce Ruth Kiesel, standing in the back. Ruth is chair of the League's Voter Service Committee this year, and she has been busy. Our timekeeper will be Mary Gassaway, sitting in the front row here. Robin Prudenbauer and Dick Kiesel and I think Ellie Bauer are here from the League. They will be the ones that will be helping in gathering questions and that sort of thing. We are all members of the League of Women Voters, Greater Verde Valley, and we are pleased to host the forum this evening. I'd like to also express our thanks to the City of Cottonwood, who provided this room for us this evening, and also to our television partners. Yavapai Broadcasting is here. Community education and citizen participation are primary goals of the League of Women Voters. The League does not come from a particular point of view or represent any one interest. We come as impartial third-party helpers in the spirit of voter service. Now we'll begin our forum. First, we'll have a few instructions. First, we will hear opening statements from candidates for two-year terms in the Arizona State Senate. There are two candidates running for one position. This forum provides a great opportunity to learn more about each candidate, their aspirations, and their goals. The opening statements will be limited to 2 minutes. Next, the candidates will respond to a league question that was provided to them in advance. The responses are limited to 3 minutes. Actually, I think there were 2 questions, so I should have said 2 questions. Then we will take a short break to collect and sort your written questions. There are 3x5 cards that will be made available for you. Our helpers will collect your questions at the time we break. Your questions may be directed to one or all of the candidates, and we ask that you avoid questions of a personal nature. They will be sorted by category and given to me. The candidates will be asked to limit their answers to 1 minute, and they may respond to a question asked of another candidate if they wish. After the question and answer period, I will ask each of the candidates to give 2-minute closing remarks, reversing the order of the opening statements. Our forum will adjourn at 6:30, after which you may want to meet the candidates personally. Our timekeeper will keep us on schedule. She has 3 signs: a 1-minute sign, a 30-second sign, and a stop sign. She will raise the 1-minute sign, then the 30-second one. You know the whole drill. In order to provide the maximum amount of time for you to hear from all the candidates, all 2 of them, we ask you to refrain from any sounds of support or opposition to the discussion. Also, we request at this time that you silence your cell phones. The forum is being taped by Ryan Nichols of Yavapai Broadcasting. It will be available for viewing at verdevalleytv.com, and it will be linked to the League of Women Voters website, lwvsedonaverdevalley.org. We request that if the broadcast is used, that it be played in its entirety. And Ryan was telling me that their program will air on Channel 2 twice a week between now and the election. You need to look at your TV guides to know what times those are. But another fun thing he told me is that it's the default program on the exercise machines in here in the rec center, so those people get to hear it. And then also at the hospital, they play Channel 2, so there's the captive audience over there that's going to hear all this. So, are there any questions about the process that we're following? Candidates? There's all clear, right? Thank you. First, I'll introduce our candidates by name. Each is seeking a 2-year term in the Arizona State Senate. Tom Chabin from Flagstaff and Chester Crandall from Heber. We have asked each candidate to introduce themselves, tell us their qualifications and reasons for running for office. They drew numbers to decide who would be first, and Tom Chabin will be our first candidate to speak.
Very good. And first, thank you to the League of Women Voters, City of Cottonwood, for the opportunity to address you. And thank you for your interest in our campaign. It is very good to hear, or very good to see, people who are interested in this process and the importance of our office. I'm Representative Tom Chabin. 40 years ago, this month, I came to Arizona. 20 years ago, my son was born, and I was elected to the Board of Supervisors in Coconino County. 5 years ago, I was appointed to the Arizona legislature by the Coconino County Board of Supervisors when Ann Kirkpatrick resigned to run for Congress. And since, I've been elected twice in my own right. The issue before us, I've refereed ball games all throughout northern Arizona. I've been a foster parent with my late wife. But I think for us, the issue is simply this. I think the issue is the legislature itself. I think that the legislature has made itself the issue for its extremely conservative agenda. And I think in many respects, and delightfully, Chester Crandall and I are friends. We represent a clear contrast in choice. So throughout the evening, I'm pleased to be here. I'm pleased to answer your questions, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As Tom, thank you for being here. It takes time out of your busy schedule, but it shows your concern about this very important process in our keeping our country free and being able to elect those who best fit what you think the values ought to be. Just a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Arizona, a little town of Holbrook, Arizona. I was born and was raised in a little town of Heber, Arizona, where I still reside. My roots go pretty deep there. My granddad on my mother's side was a cattle rancher, and I still operate that same cattle ranch that they operated. It's been in the family for 5 generations. Started cutting logs when I was 16 years old in the logwoods, and so I have an experience of working and having those experiences, enjoying the beauty that we have in the state of Arizona, and certainly something that we need to maintain. My wife and I have been married 44 years, raised 9 children. We now have 30 grandchildren, and that was one of the reasons that I decided to run for the state legislature, is to protect them and to provide for them a good educational system and to protect the environment that we have here in the state of Arizona. Just to add to, I have worked in the educational system for over 30 years. I've taught 4th grade, have gone up. I have been on the school board for 4 years, served a term on the school board for 4 years, and have my last position was a superintendent of a joint vocational district, where we actually put together a program where high school students could be on the high school campus for a half a day, and they'll go to a community college for a half a day. And we had students that were actually receiving their associate's degree before they graduated high school, because they were advanced and they wanted to get ahead with their lives. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now we'll move on to the league questions, which were provided to the candidates in advance. Each will have 3 minutes to respond. So the first question, and whichever one jumps up and starts talking first can be first now. What do you think is the proper relationship between the state government and local governments and institutions?
Do you want to rotate us, or?
However,
Go
ahead,
like.
Tom. I'll make the decision.
And please repeat the question.
What do you think is the proper relationship between the state government and local governments and institutions?
The proper relationship between the state government and local government and institutions is one as a partnership. Our schools are funded in half today, 50 cents of every dollar, K through 12, from state funds. Locally, you've maintained your funding for your local schools. The recent closing of schools throughout northern Arizona and crowded classrooms has resulted from cuts from the state directly. Your city receives shared revenue from the state of Arizona. 60% of all sales tax revenue that you pay that goes to the state is distributed to cities and counties. There's a direct relationship from actions of the legislature that affects your local road budgets. Every meeting you will go to, whether at the city or county, your local school board or the Board of Supervisors, community college, you will hear them at the outset talk about the cuts from the state. Now, more directly, how does that affect you? The legislature chose, against my vote, to fund the Department of Public Safety with your gas tax dollars. What does that mean? It means that instead of plowing 89A to Flagstaff, ADOT closes it. What does that mean? Every city has less money to maintain roads. Every county has less money to maintain roads. And it's a hefty amount. It's $170 million a year. No county can do that. No county can fund the Sheriff's Patrol Division with its share of HERF or gas tax money. But the state does it, and it hurts you. So whether or not, it isn't a question as to whether or not the state is a partner in local government, in local schools, in community colleges, and in the county. The question is whether or not it is a good partner and a fair partner. I ask you to ask your city council. I ask you to ask Mr. Ledbetter of your school board or your supervisor, has the legislature been a fair partner? Their answer is no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jessica, same question.
I think Mr. Chabin and I agree on certain areas. I did not agree with, in fact, is worked very hard to make sure that those cuts coming to these areas in the HERF funding was limited as much as possible to be able to do that. I think as a group voting and deciding how you're going to vote or where you're going to vote, you need to take a look at the total picture. We do have to have a partnership, and we do have to work together to be able to meet the needs of the constituents that live in each one of these areas. Just to paint a picture for you, the state expends out of state funds, revenue, federal revenue, $27 billion a year. The state legislature only has control of $8 billion of that. And so we have less than a third of the money that goes through this state right here. The other money is controlled by the governor's office and is controlled by propositions and initiatives that have been passed by the people that the state legislature has no control over. So when you look at the total picture, we have a very small part of the funding that we can use to provide the services that, number one, are required in the Constitution, and number two, are brought up by constituents by voting who they put into office of what needs to be funded. And so, yeah, we've gone through some tough times. We worked really hard not to go over the cliff. There's other states now that cities are going through bankruptcy, states that are looking to go through bankruptcy because they were not willing or not able, as in California's situation, because most of their money is through propositions, which is voter protected. There's not enough money to go around, and they can't cut, and so their next issue is that they have to foreclose. So the state legislature, I think, has been very frugal in looking at what needs to happen, where we need to go. We talk about the funding issue for K-12 education. If you look at statistics, K-12 education has continued to receive funding because there was a proposition that was passed, 301, that mandated the state legislature fund either 2% or the inflation factor, whichever is greater. So K-12 education has been receiving that all along. And so from 2007 to the present time, education funding has received a 10% increase all the way across the board because of the factors that we've talked about. And we'll probably get into a little bit more on K-12 education as we get into it, but you have to understand that the state legislature, who in the Constitution is to appropriate the funding, only has a third of the money that the state expends per year.
Thank you. Now it's time for the second question. In a time of budget constraints, what are the most important areas of the state to fund, either directly or through tax advantages? Do you want to alternate?
Well, I'll go ahead and start first on this one.
Okay.
I think this is very important. We need to take a look at it. You know, we have a very convoluted budget process, and I think Mr. Chabon will agree to that. We have a very convoluted budget process down at the state. It's not anything compared to what we do with our own budgets. First of all, at the beginning of January, what you're going to have is you're going to have the state Senate, and you're going to have the Speaker of the House and the governor's staff. They're all going to huddle together, and the first thing they're going to talk about is what is the rate that the state is going to grow this year? Is it going to grow 2%? Is it going to go 5%? Is it going to go 10%? What's the rate? And that will take a month or so to decide what that rate is, okay? Once they decide on that rate, then that determines how much money they can put into the budget, unlike what we do ourselves. There's no real figure out there. It's all an estimate of what it's going to be. And so what happens is you estimate too high, and the state doesn't generate that amount of money. Now you have a budget deficit, and that's exactly what happened starting in 2007, 2006, 2008. The estimate was way up here. The growth was way down here, so we ended up with a deficit, and we had to start borrowing, okay? The Constitution is very plain in what we need to have priorities, but we've strayed away from those priorities. Number one is education. We need to fund education, and we need to look at it. Now, in the current formula, we have passed that responsibility to local districts, okay? Number two, it says we need to fund transportation. And that's done through gas tax, those kind of things, the HERF funding that we talk about going to counties and so on like that. We have done a very bad job of managing that because through votes before I got there, and I'm not sure whether before Mr. Chabon got there, the decision was made to take part of that funding and fund the highway patrol, okay? The other is that we need to fund safety. Those are the three things. But through voter initiative and through voter propositions and so those things, we have brought in a lot of other things that the public feels very important to put on the general fund. And so we've lessened the amount we can put into each of those because we have to fund them. So it's a very convoluted, very tough process in budgeting when you only have a third of the money that the state expends every year.
The question again.
In a time of budget constraints, what are the most important areas for the state to fund, either directly or through tax advantages?
There's two questions there. One is tax advantages. For me, I've been on the Ways and Means Committee or the Taxing Committee for the last 5 years, and I'm the ranking Democrat on that committee. And for tax advantage, there's only one link for me, the acid test, if you will, and that's to link any tax exemption or tax credit to jobs. And not just any job, but good paying jobs. With respect to the priority in spending, I think really it's much simpler than what Mr. Crowndell outlined. Should we fund adequately child protective services? Today, if you see a child being abused or neglected and you want to report it, it goes to a call center in Phoenix, and their backlog is such that a caseworker may not attend to that call for 6 months. Their caseloads are extraordinarily high. Turnover within CPS is 30%. It is a problem. And I think that the challenge for me, having been a witness at the legislature, is that the legislature itself and its conservative agenda has focused on issues that the legislature cannot possibly hit. Takeover of federal lands. We want to fight about that, then we're going to forget about child protective services. A civilian militia at the border. We want to fight about that. Every county sheriff in the state was against it. But my gosh, that became the issue. Then we forget about the Department of Public Safety. One issue after another, ideologically driven, the passions of the legislature that you've read about, misses the goals that we can hit. So let's just talk about education spending. Let's just talk about that. $3 billion cut over the last few years. Tuition at NAU from $1,500 a semester to over $4,000 a semester in just the last 4 years. Every time we chase an issue that the legislature cannot constitutionally address, federal takeover of land, state takeover of federal lands, every time we chase that and we spend our energy there, we forget about the issues that protect us, including child protective services, Department of Public Safety. And quite frankly, that is why the Arizona Highway Patrolman endorsed me, along with the Fraternal Order of Police.
Thank you. That's given us a lot to think about. Now we're going to take a 10-minute break to collect the questions from the audience. So it's your turn. Get your cards out, and we will reconvene at 5:30.